Okay, so the problem with the equity doctrine is that it's technically impossible because there's no limit to the multiplication of groups.
Yeah.
And so what's happened right now is that the equity types pushing for equality of outcome have raised a few dimensions of group identity to the ultimate place. And so they say, well, what are the crucial hallmarks of a human being? That's easy. Race, sex, gender identity, and sexual proclivity.
It's so shallow, isn't it?
So let's say we're going to equalize across those.
Yeah.
All right, but then you can see this happening with the multiplication of the LGBT acronyms. It's like, okay, well, wait a minute, and I'll be a postmodernist here.
Sure.
Okay, why are you privileging those group identities over others that are equally relevant? Okay, so let's add some other relevant ones. Okay, how about economic class? Let's do that. Okay, because we know, for example, that immigrant blacks into the U.S. do far better than blacks who were born in the U.S. Okay, and we also know that middle-class blacks, the children of middle-class blacks, do far better than the children of poverty-stricken blacks. Okay, so we're going to add economic class. All right, then what are we going to do with racial identity? We're going to fractionate that. So let's take dark-skinned people. Are we going to consider them all black, let's say, or are we going to note the well-known differentiation between relatively light-skinned blacks and relatively dark-skinned blacks within the black community?
That is something they do as well. Very much so.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's say, well, how many races are there? Are there 3? Are there 10? Are there 30? Are you going to add ethnicity to that? You're going to add class. Okay, how about attractiveness? So would you rather be a racial minority or ugly?
That's a great question. I think I'd rather be a racial minority. Thank you very much.
Well, everyone I've ever asked that question to immediately says that.
That's a great
what
question.
about height? What about height?
Yeah.
What about health?
Yeah.
What about intelligence? What about temperament? Because the temperamental determinants of outcome are very, very powerful. They're more powerful than racial or gender. Okay, so what happens is it's combinatorial explosion is the death knell of equity. 10 races times what? 2 sexes? Or how many sexes? 5?
Wow, yeah. As many as you choose, yeah.
How about 70 gender identities? Okay, so now we've got 10 by 3 by 70. We haven't even touched temperament. We haven't touched it.
Oh, you seem to have frozen there. Can you hear me? Oh, God.
Categories across which equity can be calculated, multiply to infinity. That's why you need to focus on the individual, because individual focus is the only focus that takes into account all the differences between people. That's what the West discovered.
Do you know what's very interesting about this? This sounds very much like Hayek's argument for a non-centralized, non-planned economy, but made to social interactions. Because his argument was it's irreducibly complex. So if we let people work it out on their own and set their own market prices and whatnot, then we don't have to worry about the scale of and scope of what the endeavor we're undertaking.
Yeah, well, it's actually technically true from a computational perspective. Is that, you see, it's so funny because the postmodernists actually discovered that. See, because one of their central claims was you cannot specify a canonical interpretation of a literary text. There's a very large number of potential interpretations, right? And which is absolutely true, because a text is like a Shakespeare play is a very complicated phenomena. Okay. So that means that the domain of interpretation is unbounded. And then they thought, oh, that's a big problem, because that means the domain of interpretation in general is unbounded. Well, that also happens to be true. That's why artificial intelligence researchers have had a hard time generating machines that can perceive the world, because there's almost an infinite number of ways you can perceive the world. So the postmodernists really were onto something, although Then they made the fatal mistake of saying, well, because there's an almost unlimited number of interpretations, there's no way of determining which of them are correct. And that's where they're starting to make a mistake, because that goes back to our initial discussion, is that, well, I have to extract out from a text an interpretation that's functional in the world that other people also allow. So there are parameters and restrictions that are built into the interpretive systems. Well, the same thing basically applies to problems of pricing. It's like, well, what's the price of something? Well, that depends on the price of everything else. Okay, who can compute that? No one.
Yeah.
It can't be computed. So what do? You leave people to compute it on their own. It's the only solution. It's a distributed computational solution.